I mean, I don't think you can go through Harvard Business School and say you're completely lazy. From my standpoint, there's different classifications of lazy. What my classification of lazy is that if you see something that is a process, you are always, when you're smart and lazy, you're always thinking of, is there a better way, a cheaper way, or a faster way of doing something? You might not necessarily, and I know I never did extra credit in class. It was just, if I knew a subject, I would usually get bored and I would move on to something else. But what I would say, if you kind of think about that topic of the smart and lazy idea, is that you want to force, the concept there is to really get your kids to always think, is there a better way to kind of do stuff? And they don't necessarily need to do exactly the form. When they're going through the process of doing something, they're not going to go through all the steps of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They might actually think about what is the outcome and then what is the best path to get there. I think that's probably the most important part of that. And then along that line, when you're smart and lazy, you aren't thinking of, if I work for 12 years in this company and become a second-line manager, that someday I'm going to get promoted to be CEO. You are probably have a little bit less patience, and you probably will, no offense. I think you have.
Buy your company.
We're happy to for the right price. But I would say that what you want to do as you're going through that process is you want to actually think about, okay, when you're going down this path and you don't have a level of impatience, but at the same time you have an outcome, you're forcing your kids, when you're smart and lazy, actually, instead of following the directions, you're actually trying to think about what the outcome is. And then when you think about what the outcome is, they're trying to figure out what is the best path for them to get there. Versus, I think writing and following someone else's path from 15 years ago, if you followed someone else's path from 15 years ago from getting to point A to B, it's probably completely obsolete.
What's the most important, I think, qualities as a CEO? First question. Second question is, so how do you define a successful career? And I think, are you happier as a CEO, or were you happier when you were an engineer or product manager?
So the qualities I kind of showed a little bit, and they could be all over. But I would say these are, generally, this one's probably pretty good. Flexible, good communicator, courage, tenacity, humble, responsible. So there's a lot of, good big words that have good character and leadership. Happiness, boy, how much time do we have to talk about happiness? I will tell you, interesting is I am kind of the, how the fossils are always looking for that missing link, the half-footed tail with the thing. I'm kind of that link, right, in the sense that I was really came from a mentality where my parents were very traditional Chinese from China, from Taiwan, and then came to America when I was very little. So I had kind of both worlds. And so my mentality is evolving from very traditional to, where you're going, hey, there's a better way and I can do it and no one's going to stop me, and that risk-taking entrepreneur. So that's where I had to go through the 12 years to kind of get thrusted out and then discover and question, what would I have done different? How do I do differently for my own children? As far as happiness goes, again, my story is now where I went back to doing more research, and I founded a nonprofit that works with schools that gives my creative entrepreneur side something to do. And then I like that. And the main reason is I had meetings with Europe starting at 6:30 a.m. when I was running a division or a company, and I had meetings all day, of course, in the U.S. And then I had meetings all day, all night with Asia. Okay, it's a global company, and so you're always in meetings. And with the cell phone, you're always connected. And I realized that I had 4 boys, and I didn't have 4 boys so that my wife could raise them. And so I went back, and don't tell anybody, but I have a 9-to-5 job. I'm really good at what I do because I spent 20 years being an expert on optical engineering laser devices, right, high-speed devices. And so everybody was just flabbergasted. They look at my LinkedIn and go, "What happened? You know, you went from engineer to CEO startup, and then sold the startup, and then general manager, VP of sales and marketing, and then came back to R&D." And I was like, "Well, it's just a secret. That's my choice, right?" So that's something where you can go. You don't have to do. You're not doing this to prove anything, right? It isn't. At some point, you realize you're doing it for yourself and your family, and just like you said, what makes you happy and what makes the people you love happy. And you can only collect so many Teslas and toys and sell so many companies right at the end. That's what drives Silicon Valley. And I think we can have a lot of conversation on that conversation, on the balance between what really is happy.
Is it most CEO has a high energy? Like if a person smart, lazy, as you mentioned, but has low energy, is it?
I think the key thing you want to take away from that, do not misinterpret lazy. It's really inefficiency, right? In the sense that lazy is someone that...
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're leading the company, and people have to come to work wanting to work with you. And if it's a person that no one wants to be around, but you have all the answers, it most of the time doesn't work. And what I always talk to people about is as a CEO, you actually don't always try to figure out and go after the answer of exactly what is right as much as you want to know what the right answer is and figure out what is the most efficient way for you to get to that answer. Going back to the question of happiness, by the way, as you kind of think about it, I know this is the last company I'm going to start. Like, I've started 3 companies already. I don't know why I did this one. But I think that when you look back at a career, I think the one thing you kind of want to do is be able to do stuff that you want to do in your career, not be forced. Like my parents, growing up, they had to work till they were in their 60s, and they specifically were waiting for that retirement date. And I think growing up, one of the big motivation factors for me was never actually having to wait for that date of when you want to retire, versus making determinations of when your friends are retired so you can hang out with them. And I think that if you kind of think about those as a driver, you will find careers and things that you want to do to, especially if you become an entrepreneur, to be able to define kind of how you want to run your life, as Al's talked about was on the current stuff he's doing. The reason I'm actually doing a consumer internet business is because I hate to travel. I actually don't like to travel at all. When CBS bought my company, I had to travel all the time because I had hundreds of people in my division. I had to go place to place. So when it was one of my criteria about starting this company was finding a company that I knew was going to be in a huge market where I actually didn't have to travel. And consumer internet provided the best opportunity. All my customers are everywhere. And my investors are on Sand Hill Road, so I literally don't have to ever leave the Bay Area. And so I think that those things that give you joy, you can define certain happiness. I do find the intellectual stimulation of running a company pretty humbling, but also very enjoyable.
Let's take some of these questions. This is a good one. Let me do some of them. We'll go. It says, about the smart and lazy, do some criminals belong to this category? And so how do you balance that as far as training a child that wants to cut corners and basically say, I don't know, like cheat or whatever, that kind of mentality where I don't want to do the work, I want to copy someone else?
Well, I would say I have a lot of friends who are venture capitalists, and I think that when you think about the idea of, at least I will point out entrepreneurship, and I think it reflects also the S&P 500 CEOs as well, is that when you think about a leadership role in one of these organizations, you are at the intersection of creativity and greed. But there's none of us that want to start companies because we don't want to make money. I don't go to work thinking every day, hey, I'm doing this because I'm making money, but at the end of the day, hopefully you'll get a big outcome. Among all my friends, we've been fortunate enough to have had some success, but I would say it is the intersection of creativity and greed. And you can probably look at some criminals and probably say that for some of the con artists, they probably are at the same intersection, but maybe they don't, their backgrounds are a little different. And the foundation behind these CEOs is that hopefully you have a good moral compass, that you are not leading to the side of breaking the law. But some of the mindsets are somewhat the same, but you're trying to do it in a different way. Would you say, for instance, that in the old days, the founders of Google, for instance, where they were probably, very smart and they were lazy in terms of some of the work that they initially were thinking about how to make their search engine more efficient. They were also very cheap about it, and that's what created this platform that they had. If you kind of look through the lines of most people who started companies, the majority of that characteristic is that intersection of creativity and greed, which makes them somewhat smart and lazy.
Actually, a leader, when I was researching this, I had a really good analogy, which is when you build a building, you have to finish the foundation before you can go up. And what they meant by that is, answering the question about between criminal and what you teach is going back is you really have to develop integrity and trust and honesty, because that's the foundation, right? If you don't have it, if you don't have that foundation, you start building up. Then there are we see, when you're up in the CEO level, you have all this pressure to succeed and to make the stock go up. The temptation is there to, maybe we can fudge this number, and then you get into so you have to have a very strong, and that's where I think the family comes in to develop that foundation.
In my class at business school, I had we've had very successful people. In fact, a few of them became billionaires. We've also had a few of my classmates that were actually caught as part of the investigation for insider trading. So you always have, when you put together people that are very smart in a group, that you're going to have certain subsets of people that do right and wrong. I think the most important thing for us as parents is probably giving a good moral compass so that when we get in these situations, the things that become slippery slopes, they don't make some of those wrong decisions.
Yeah, and I find that the fact that it's okay to make mistakes, it doesn't change who you are. Your parents still love you. It's not conditional. That helps them, right? Because they have to make a decision at a test whether they're going to cheat or not, and they're going to realize, hey, if I don't do well, it's okay. In a sense, and that's really hard to hear. I know it's probably hard for me to hear, but it's hard to do. But that's where you have to get.
I think at their age, also, you want to raise your kids, at least personally for us, where we want them to try stuff that they're not going to be good at. Because if they don't do that in life, they're never, if no one wakes out of bed and says, I'm going to be a great CEO, but you work at it every day to become a better leader, and if they actually have this complex where they think they need to be excellent at something, they will never get that shot at the top job. They will be able to do the work that's in a textbook, and that's why you get a PhD. But you will not, but that doesn't create kind of this idea of creating leaders. And so there's a few questions here I'll quickly ask. How did you deal with Asian identity?
Okay, we'll get back.
Yeah. So how did you deal with Asian identity being the only Asian in class when growing up? Feeling inefficient at times?
Actually, it was really hard. I mean, because kids being kids, they would make fun of me and all of that. But I felt, at least in our family, my parents were really, really unconditionally loving us a lot. That, and I speak really, I think, for coming at 7, I can speak Mandarin and do business in Mandarin still after 45 years, because it was the home that I wanted to get back to. That was the only place I could speak Mandarin. So after school, we'd rush home and be able to speak. And so I think it was difficult in those years, very difficult. And I remember, this is a really sad picture, my sister was in 5th grade and I was in 2nd grade, and there was a line that divided all the 3rd grade and below and the 4th and 5th graders. And at recess, we would stand at the line and then just talk to each other in Chinese because we didn't know any English. But that is what grows you up, right? So when I go into a room, when I go into a party, when I go into any business or any social event, I look for the person that's quiet. Right? Because of my experience, I don't have to be popular. I don't have to be. I have the skills and the communication ability to be in front of everybody, but I don't do that. At a party, you'll never see me walking around, talking and laughing and everything. I want to go find the person that's quiet, that doesn't have anybody to talk to, and I sit with them because that was who I was. And so that experience, I thought was a real gift for me to be able to have that kind of mentality.
I'd like to ask, as a CEO, you must have a lot of stress, right? I mean, how do you prevent from bringing your stress to your family and to your kids?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I had to learn that. I think that the answer there is I didn't do a very good job when I first got into it because it was just so, you just felt like that was what defined you, right? And when you begin to be defined by your role, when people go, what do you do? I always say, I have 4 boys, right? I'm a father of 4, and that's what defines me right now, versus why I work here and I do this, and all that. And so I don't really have a good question, a good answer for that as far as how to, because everybody deals with stress very differently. But I think the best answer I have is apologize a lot. No, I mean, it's really good. I mean, because what it does is it shows your children that you're humble, you make mistakes, dad's stressed, dad shouldn't have yelled at you or not, said, I don't want to do something with you right now. And then that humbles you, right? Everybody knows. If you're a parent, it's a humbling occupation, right? Being a parent. When I talk about CEO, nobody says, oh, here's how to be a good parent. I think that's where, I think the great parents are the ones that realize that they aren't very good at it, and they're learning and they're developing. And if you are very transparent to your kids and say, Dad's really stressed, had a bad day, sorry I yelled at you, I think it calms everybody down versus feeling like I'm dad and I need to be right all the time. Because that pressure is even more stressful because then you feel like you failed. Okay? When you yell at them and go, oh man, I can't even be a good dad. I had a bad CEO day. It's like I'm going to go walk the dog, right? It's like,
you touch upon the moral value to be a CEO, and the other part is a foundation. I mean, the other part is a technical foundation. So in our Asian community, and we very much emphasize on education. And a lot of people say like, oh, you really need at least a master's degree or a PhD to be well prepared to lead a company. So I think that's a prevalent kind of thinking. But your graph said
2%.
majority, only 2%, and majority is like a bachelor degree.
Right.
So but when you talk about that statistics, and people will say, as an Asian, and you really want to be technically stronger than others, and that's a way to do it.
I think that is actually a stumbling block, right? I was saying that we have to move away from the mentality that we have to be the smartest person in the room. Because I think that means that you do certain things to preserve that rank. Whereas when I became a CEO, and actually why I moved away from technical, because I was realizing that there were so many intelligent people that were much smarter than I am. But I had the ability to speak their language and to talk to them and talk the way they want to talk, and then find and identify the really smart guys, and get them together, and then give them a vision to go beyond what each individual could do.
So knowing the experience and knowing the gift and also passing through this process, if you choose to be CEO before your PhD, do you think you will be as successful?
I
Probably
think so.
more.
Yeah,
I think that the thing to kind of consider when you guys say the smartest guy, I actually think the CEO needs to be the smartest guy in the room, but it's not the smartest. But it's not.
That's why I use the word GPA.
It's not the GPA smarts that we're talking about. The person actually has to be probably the most technical when it comes to having all the traits that make up leadership and running a company. So the skill sets that we talked about earlier, having the flexibility of being a generalist where you have a little knowledge on finance, you have knowledge about product development, you have knowledge about engineering, but the most important thing I think out of all those is the ability to make decisions and trade-offs, and then being able to lead a group. So you do need to actually be the smartest in the group, but you have to redefine what smart means.
Time check. I know people have to get home and everything, so don't feel bad if you need to take off.
Is mine the last question?
No.
Okay, this question is to both of you. In your day-to-day job as a CEO, what's your greatest challenge to you, and how did you get through it? Can you give us an example?
Well, I would say that the toughest thing for me before was the first time. Actually, so ironically, I was I would say I would go back before I became the CEO, which is I was one of the youngest vice presidents at Yahoo at the time when the company was growing. Do you remember when Yahoo used to be Yahoo? When Yahoo was actually a great company to work for and everyone wanted to work there. So I was one of the young vice presidents there at Yahoo, and I think that, you know, having a lot of people that were actually a little older than me and working on my team and kind of leading hundreds of people, I had no idea how to lead them, except I studied in books. I think that was probably the more challenging thing. And then I thought at that time leading those people would be like, that was a real challenge. You get over that hurdle, understanding actually how you lead an organization, how you recruit, how you bring people. And those experiences you have inside larger companies were great foundations to actually running your own show. But what you don't realize is that when you actually become the person inside the company, the biggest challenge on a day-to-day basis is actually being able to turn it off. Because you think about payroll, you think about the livelihood of the people that made sacrifices to give up big-time jobs to work for you. And you kind of constantly think about the competition and how you make your company better. So I would say it's one of those jobs that you actually can never turn off. You know, I had opportunities to actually be CEOs at some much larger companies, but they were not necessarily the right fit for me. So for a whole host of reasons, one of them being particularly I would have to do a lot of travel. And so I think that the most important thing to kind of keep in mind is it's one of those things that it might not be for everyone. It's one of those all-encompassing jobs that there are some weeks that we literally don't sleep because you're lying in bed awake, stressed out about something. There's always, as soon as you get over one thing, there's always something else. There's obviously the glory of what they make out to be in the press, but it's not always like that.
Yeah, my biggest challenge, very close to that, is during downturns where you have to lay off people. Every quarter, when I was running a large division, we have people, division fill in all around the world. When there's a downturn and you have to make decisions to slash departments and such, that is just really hard. Because the numbers no longer are just numbers where you're looking at budgets. It's very easy to look at cash flow and spreadsheets and kind of understand that. But then once you realize that these numbers affect people, I think that was the hardest, very, very difficult part. But when you're transparent to your people and you tell them this, I'm really struggling with this, but we have to do this, and you're honest with them, that's where the honesty, they respect that. They realize that you're doing everything you can, and this is what we have to do. And it's painful, or we can share it all across. I mean, I still have a lot of HP in me, the original Bill and Dave HP way, which is, we're all in this together, right? In a downturn, everybody takes a pay cut, and we work 9 out of 10 days, etc. So I'm built in that way, but if we ever do have layoffs and such, that's the hardest thing for me.
I'm Indian, but this is the best parented, and even though I'm Indian, a lot of these things apply to me. So just wanted to let you know. And Asian, exactly, you're Asian. So one thing I'll tell you about myself. I don't know how many of you came as father and mother here. See, I came alone. So now I'm going to go argue with my wife. But this is the way to do. So that's one other thing that happens. All these are good, but then you also need to have, you both need to think the same. And there's always this prestige, she hears about someone else, some other parent doing something, and then comes home, and I have to say, okay, no.
We're the CEO, but the wives are the chairman of the board. Everybody has a boss.
By the way, I'm not a CEO, so I can't really give you this stuff, but a lot of these things are, I wish I had heard, Al talk about these things a long time. Now my kids are, at least one kid is in college, so I was a bad parent.
I actually have a question for you, and
here, so like 2 questions. This, in my observation in the investment banking and corporate, I've seen a lot more successful Indian American than Chinese American. Like we came at the same time and then tried to study. I have boss, I have great mentor, a professor in English, same with Chinese. And one thing I'm really, I'm struggling, and I think I have some hypothesis.
want to know is what are the difference in culture? Is it debate or what is it that I see a lot more CEO, McKinsey, you know, you name it, a lot more.
I think a lot of things are the same. In fact, I know why all of you got on smart and lazy. We don't like the word lazy. But the way I tell my kids, I tell the exact same thing. I didn't know parents said that. So I tell my son, I play for 3 hours every day during my high school. You can't spend all your time doing homework. So I tell him, you must play. You must figure out a smarter way to finish your homework fast and play a video game. So it's kind of being smart and lazy. So I said, don't do all the problems the way it is. Figure out, every problem is a trick, right? The answer is already known. It's not research. So you figure out the trick, do it smart way, and make time for you to play. So we are all the same thing. The one difference, or one thing that I am different from my wife, and which is why we have a lot of arguments. I believe in some of the things that Al mentioned. You don't have to have PhD. When I first came, I had very similar experience. When I first came, I'll tell you one thing. So, again, I grew up poor, my family, so we all have a different mindset. But then I come here, our kids are spoiled, or at least my kids are spoiled. They don't think the same way. They get an iPhone 5, iPhone 4, or everything. So, my parents wanted me to go to a best school because they didn't have money to send to any other school. In India, the best school was the lowest tuition. So today I see parents want them to send and get scholarship because they want the name. But imagine you're poor and you want to go to a good school because my parents couldn't afford it. And that's the only reason why I had to study, is that otherwise I knew I couldn't go to college. But today, the pressure is different, and I keep telling them, I come here, my boss, he was from some college that I didn't know. In India, it's like, oh, what? How can he be your manager, all this stuff. So you have to get rid of all that. And that's what will lead to happiness too. That's what I have found. You don't think about prestige, you don't think about all this stuff. Every day, you feel like doing what you want to do. And that really is what drives me.
Right.
And it's very hard to tell to our children. In fact, they will believe him if he says all the stuff, but if I tell them, no. It's very hard. That's why.
Yeah, so if you could tell my kids.
I really want them to watch him.
So that goes to the next follow-up on the question, right? What are the challenges of Asian being as a CEO of American companies, right? Then it goes to Chinese.
So I was going to touch upon that real quick. That is that you'll see that our paths really eventually became founding our own companies. That's a really quick way. You want to be a CEO, start a company, right? So I still find it's just unacceptable that there are no Chinese Fortune 500 CEOs. And that's what we have to do, right? In the sense that our kids have to begin to think that I can run Ford, I can run General Electric, I can run Microsoft, etc. Right? And so
Indians.
Yeah, they're Indians, right? And exactly, right.
That follows up.
That follows that step. Yeah, I don't know that difference,
Well,
but
I would say the skill sets being the CEO, Fortune 500 CEO is a little different. I would have gone down the path in a few companies where you would move up the ladder. And you actually have to ask yourself if you have the patience of moving up that ladder, because I will tell you the skill set. Also the skill set's completely different if you're a CEO of the founders are different CEOs than a caretaker CEO. And a caretaker CEO, sometimes when you're talking about these larger companies, I very much would bet you that there will be more Asian CEOs over the next 20 years. It just will happen if you look at the sheer numbers. You look at the universities and the kids that go, as long as they don't come out as robots, I think there's going to be a lot of Asian kids that will have the opportunity, if they wanted to rise up through a lot of these companies. One of the things I would also say, though, is if you look at the definition of the Fortune 500, just look back at the last 10, 15 years, what the companies that we talked about as Fortune 500 that we classify as companies you really would love to see your kid become CEO of, about 15% of them are no longer here. So I kind of go back, I'll name some names that at one time they sounded like great companies that no longer exist. Fannie Mae, Sallie Mae, MCI, WorldCom, Enron. You kind of go through 3Com. And so I think our tradition of what sometimes where we go to, where we think, oh, we really want to push our kids to be successful in these companies, they should probably find the companies that probably suit them the most. I have no doubt in my mind, because I think that the world is becoming so global that there's not a U.S. company, there's global companies. There's probably not an Asian CEO. There's a CEO who happens to have an Asian descent who can lead a global company. And I think that that will happen. I just don't think, I really don't think much about kind of the race card or the fact that you're Asian, so someone needs to put you there or someone will prevent you from there. But if in a competitive marketplace, capitalistic environment, society, the best over time will win. Unfortunately, inside a Fortune 500 company, the best will win is based upon the fact that it's more like a game of Survivor than it is a game of skill sets. And if you really don't want to kind of work your life until you're 55 before you become CEO, and you want to work till you're 70, it's probably not the path for you.
And I think
it's not the path for my kids.
For my classmates, same college, same bachelors, they are CEOs. And the big difference is that it's not studies, it's your network. So when you're studying, if you're just focusing on getting your degree, like Al did or some of my friends did and I did, I think that's what Wharton, Harvard, Stanford, the alumni network, that's the key thing. So that's what I found in my friends.
Question, let's get on to study.
So this is going back, so I think you see a lot of minorities, and I'm always passionate to see, I have a daughter, girl. And in tech or in big or small company, you really don't see any female executives in C-levels. And I know you mentioned a couple of things. I'm not looking for a perfect answer, but I'd like to hear your opinion. Risk-taking, that's normally not the big thing for girls, and breaking rules. Those are the things I'm cognizant of when I teach my girls. What are the things you think that really sort of set girls? I think they're equally intelligent, so I always assume girls as smart, of course, not smarter. What are the things you think that kind of push the girl back? Whether it's in your corporate life or entrepreneurship, tech.
Well, I think actually I studied that. Not necessarily it applies to women, but also it applies to Asians where we're very polite. They had a study where they had girls and boys and they talked about a topic or toy. The girls always waited their turn, where they played family. All their games are about social getting together, whereas boys are trying to kill each other, right? They're playing war, right? And so, and Asians are always like, we're the model minority. We want to be quiet. We don't want to make noise, etc. And so, a lot of times in a board meeting, I might have the best idea, but my culture tells me to wait, right? Or not make someone else look bad, right? And there's a little bit of that dynamic all the time where you have to kind of exert yourself and your ideas and speak up. And I think as Asians as well as females that are more nurturing, that tends to that nature inside. That's why they, the ones that, I hate to say this, but the one CEOs that are women, they always go, oh, she's very, yeah, because if a man does that, he's a patent leader, he's a lion. If a woman does that, he goes, oh, I'm glad I'm not married to her. That's just not fair. The society doesn't weigh that. She goes, wow, she's very aggressive. She's like a man. That's just not the fairness.
I would say that actually there's a lot of women leaders, and I think it just depends, in terms of if people follow in the stereotype or not. I know for a lot of, sometimes, I don't want to stereotype or generalize, but I know that for a big part of how to get ahead these days is to not just follow the exact rules of what's exactly the premeditated path about how to get there. I will tell you that Alison Campa, who is my VP marketing inside our company, she was an executive for a number of years at Intuit, Yahoo, Skype recently. She's has a undergrad degree in computer science from Duke, MBA from Stanford, very top notch. Our Nancy Tellem, who just joined our board as a company, she was an executive at Paramount Pictures and the president of CBS Television. Recently, she's on the board of MGM, and she joined our company. Highly successful female, grew up in Danville, in fact, in the East Bay, went to school at Berkeley, and then she was one of the executives that found Friends in ER, if you know those TV shows. So she's, again, a very successful female. You got examples here of Sheryl Sandberg in the area. I think there's Andrea Jung who ran Avon. So I think that sometimes maybe one of the things that's holding back, I hate to say, might be the fact that it was kind of the same as when we were growing up, which is there just weren't a lot of role models. And because there weren't role models, in fact, I remember growing up, the only athlete I ever saw that was an Asian was, what's the guy's name? Michael Chang, tennis player? And he was like the only one people ever cited, but if you look at it now, there's just a lot more role models. I think that that's going to be the case, and over time, you know, if you go with the sheer numbers of people that are going to be qualified, I think you will see more leaders that are female, and I think that you will also see a higher number of people that are Asian. You know, I look at my business school class, and I would say that by choice, some of the females in our class chose, even though they were very talented, to take 10 years off to raise kids. And that was a personal choice on their side, and it had nothing to do with the fact that they had talents or no talent, but they made the conscious choice.
You guys want us to keep answering questions, or you want to go? Sure. Why don't you ask offline? Thank you very much for coming.